In today's video, you're going to learn everything you need to know regarding event bubbling and event capturing in JavaScript. And we're also going to cover kind of event delegation as well, as that is often kind of wrapped into this. And you might get asked about this on like an interview, and it's just generally something that is good to know. So first things first, what is event bubbling? Well, event bubbling, it is kind of a term used to describe the behavior of how an event works within the web browser. So what I'm talking about here is when an event occurs on a child element, you can actually handle that event, or that event is going to bubble up to all parent elements. So for example, let's say that you have a list item that is your most child element of your web page. And wrapping around that is a ordered list tag. So you have an LI that is within an OL tag. And then let's say that OL is within a overall main tag. And let's say that main tag is within your body tag. So your DOM is going to have this parent-child relationship in which you're going to have your body tag, and then a child to that is going to be that main tag, and then the child to that is going to be your ordered list, and then the child of that is going to be your list item. And if that event occurs on that list item, well, that event is going to bubble up to your ordered list, and it's going to bubble up to your main tag, and it's going to bubble up to your body tag. So you can actually handle this event on any of these elements as the event kind of bubbles up through the document hierarchy or the DOM hierarchy. And this is also why you can do things like event delegation, which is kind of a fancy term to describe that. Okay, let's say you have a bunch of list items rendered within an ordered list. Well, instead of adding an event handler on every single list item, you can actually just add that event handler on your ordered list. And regardless of what list item that event occurs on, it's going to bubble up to your ordered list. So then you can kind of use your event target to delegate which list item that event should relate to. And then you can handle it that way. So it kind of allows you to write a little bit more kind of clean, maintainable, scalable code by just handling some of these events on a parent element rather than every single child element. And event bubbling is why this is allowed to happen, because the event will occur on the childmost element and then it actually bubbles up to all the parent elements in which you could also handle that event. Now, you'll also hear the term kind of thrown around, event capturing. What is event capturing? Well, event capturing, it works the same way as event bubbling, but kind of in reverse, meaning the event capturing phase is going down the DOM hierarchy. So the event would occur on the most parent element, and then it would kind of capture down to all the child elements. So in my example earlier, the event would first occur on your body element, then your main element, then your ordered list, then your kind of childmost list item element. And the way that I think about this, and the reason I believe it's called the capturing phase, is because this is actually the phase that does occur first when an event occurs in the web. However, your web browser is going to capture these events, so to speak, all the way down to your childmost element. And then once it hits that childmost element, that's where it actually will kind of emit that event and allow you to handle it. Or at least that's the default behavior when you add an event listener. Although I will talk about some examples of how you can change that behavior here in a sec. But it will capture all these events as you work from parent to child, and then it hits the childmost element, and then it will kind of, release that event. And then it will go to the next parent, and it will release the event that it captured. And it keeps kind of bubbling those events up after it kind of captures them all the way down the DOM. So the event bubbling phase is where an event occurs from child to parent element all the way up the DOM to the parentmost element. And then the capturing phase is when an event occurs from parent element to childmost element, and it works its way down the DOM hierarchy. So let me show you an example of this kind of working in action. I think this will really help things kind of come together to make a lot more sense. So what I have going on here is, first, I have just some HTML here, and in my HTML, I just have a overall main tag. It's very similar to kind of the example I was talking about earlier. It has an overall main tag here. And then within this main tag, I do just have a title, Code Ryan, but I have an ordered list. And then I just have some list items within my ordered list. And then within my JavaScript here, I grab my main element. I also get my ordered list and I get all my list items. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add event listeners to all of these different elements so we can see the behavior of the event bubbling and capturing kind of in action here. So I add my event listener to my main element, to my ordered list, and then for every list item, I do a for each method over these, and I add the event listener to each list item, so all 3 list items. And like I said earlier, instead of handling each item like I do here, since these events bubble up from the list item, you could really handle all of the list item events just with this kind of ordered list. And you could kind of delegate those events that way. All right. And then I'll also touch on here in a sec how we can kind of change the default behavior. But now that I have this all set up here, and these are all waiting for a click event to occur. So I have this running live in my browser here. And when I click on one of my list items here, you're going to see that all 3 of these event handlers run. But the order in which these run is kind of like what I talked about earlier. The default behavior of events when you use add event listener is for the events to kind of bubble up throughout your page. So you first see my item event handler runs first. So my childmost element. And then it bubbles up to my ordered list event handler, the overall list here. And then that bubbles up to my main event handler, kind of what's wrapping my ordered list. So it works from child to parent most element here by default. And then you can see no matter how many times I click this, it's going to be item event handler, ordered list, main event, child most to parent most event handler. Now, what if I want to change this behavior and I want it to actually work in reverse? I want it to go from parent to child most. Well, to this add event listener, and for this add event listener method, I have a whole separate video on this, so I'm not going to go into detail on how this works. But if you don't really understand this method, feel free to check that video out. But to change the default behavior here, you can pass a third argument to add event listener, and that argument is going to be an object. And in that object, it has a capture property. And if you set the capture property to true, it means that it is actually going to handle this event in the capture phase on the way down the DOM rather than in the bubble phase. So if and let me refresh my page here real quick. If I click on one of these list items, what I would expect to see, if Ryan didn't mess anything up here, is my main element is going to run first, then my ordered list, then my list item, because it's going to go parent to child most. So if I click this, you do indeed see that my main event handler runs first, then my ordered list, then my item event handler, because it's going to work from parent to child most element because it's going to capture its way down the DOM. So in your add event listener, you can actually determine whether you handle your events during that initial capturing phase or if you handle your events in the bubbling phase, because the browser, it will first kind of capture all these events down the DOM, and then it will bubble these events back up through the DOM tree. And by default, your add event listener will handle the bubbling phase, but you can set this third argument here to handle it during the capturing phase. Now, another kind of interesting thing that you can do here with add event listener is, let's say that you only wanted to handle an event on a certain element one time. So let's say you want to know the first time that a click happens within this main element, but you only care about running your event handler that one single time. Well, what you can do is you can set the once property of your object that you pass into add event listener as the third argument to kind of pass some options to it. You can set the once property to true. So if I set the once property to true for my main element add event listener, what we're going to see is that my main element event listener, this function that I pass in, is only going to run one single time. But all of these other elements, those are going to run as many times as I click on these elements. So if I go back to my web page here and I click these elements, you're going to see all of these elements still run, and they're still running within the capturing phase. So they're going from parent to childmost element. And then just to make this crystal clear here, let me actually just set capture to false here. So we can go back to the default behavior of the browser, and you can see how that changes behavior again. So I click this here. You can now see that it goes from child to parentmost element. We go item, ordered list, and then main event handler. But when I click on this again here, what you're going to see is that my main event handler, it doesn't run again. It only runs the one time because I set the once property to true. So if I hit this again, you're going to see that my item event handler runs first because it's the childmost element and I'm handling these in the bubble phase. And then my ordered list event handler runs next because it's the parent to the item event. But my main event handler, it does not run again because it is only set to run once because I've configured that within that options object that I pass as a third argument to add event listener. And there's definitely more options that you can pass there. Those are a couple that I think might have a couple of the most kind of practical use cases, but you can definitely check out like Mozilla Developer Network or just give a quick Google search on other options that you can pass, and you can see maybe when you might use one of those. But as you can see, as I keep clicking this, my main event handler, it's not going to run again. Just my item and ordered list event handler run again because I have set my once to be true in my main event handler right here. So I hope this video gives you a good understanding of how bubbling, capturing, event delegation, and how to kind of customize your event listener, how all that works. And I will see you in the next one.